Welcome back to Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. I'm your host, Life Coach Marina Young, and sitting in the guest chair today is Dr. Monica A. Coleman. Dr. Coleman and I are going to be speaking on the topic of bipolar faith, dealing with depression and faith. And boy, this is going to be a really, really interesting conversation. I think I've only heard someone combine those two things once before. And I think it was a preacher that was talking to me, but coming on the show, and he was talking about his depression and how that felt for him as a leader for congregation. But we actually never did get that interview. So now I am pumped to hear from Dr. Coleman. She's a published author, Simon and Simon and Schumacher author, and she has been a minister since she's 19. So great information here. So welcome, Dr. Monica.
Hi, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, you're very welcome. All right. So let me give you a short bio and introduction. Monica A. Coleman is a professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She spent over 10 years in graduate theology education at Claremont School of Theology and Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. Answering her call to ministry at the age of 19, Dr. Coleman brings her experiences in evangelical Christianity, Black church traditions, and indigenous spirituality to her discussions of religion. Dr. Coleman is the author or editor of 6 books and several articles that focus on her role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical, I'm not sure what's wrong with me, issues. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, shares her lifelong dance with trauma and depression and how she discovers a new and liberating vision of God. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, is required reading at leading theological schools around the country. Dr. Coleman also co-hosts the web series Octavia Tried to Tell Us, Parable for Today's Pandemic. Dr. Coleman speaks widely on mental wellness, navigating change, religious diversity, mental wellness, and religious responses to intimate partner violence. Wow, you have some depth, okay? Yeah, so you have some depth, and I'm glad that you focus a lot of your work in the Black community and the Black churches and understanding Black communities, and also writing a book on, something that, you hear all the time in Black churches. God is going to make a way out of no way. So that's awesome. All right. So I want to start off our conversation by probably something that set you on the path of where you are today. And that's the story of your grandfather. It's a powerful story when I read it. So can you start off with that, telling us, why, how you were called into the ministry at an early age, why you do this work, your ministry, and how your grandfather influenced you in that?
In the book, Bipolar Faith, I tell the story of my great-grandfather. So it's my maternal grandmother's father, so whom I've never met, of course. And some of his experiences, or this particular experience with him in the small town in South Carolina where this part of my family is from. So the story I tell is one of how he decides to hang himself, and he has one of my great uncles help him in doing this. Actually, 2 of my great uncles help him a bit in doing this. And they ask him to pull the chair out from underneath him, and he is hung by a noose that he had set up in this kind of closet shed part of the home property. And then I go on to find out that this this rope had hung here for years and years and years after this had happened. And this is still the house that my grandmother and her siblings grew up in. And I did not know this story until I was well into my 20s. So it wasn't a story that I was told, even though many people in the family knew it. What my grandmother would talk about when she would talk about being orphaned or having her parents die at a very young age was about her mother dying, with complications from childbirth. And then she said, and 6 months later, my father died of grief. And so I understand how she came to that conclusion, right? That there's this deep sadness that leads to this kind of activity, right? But I thought it was like that you could just get so sad that you would die. And this was actually just kind of part of my family's story that was talked about in these kind of metaphorical ways rather than in more direct ways. So I think it shaped me in the sense of there was something in me that knew that you could get so sad you would die, right? The grief kills in a way, the deep, deep grief kills. And I think this is a kind of backdrop to a lot of the many other things that I end up talking about in Bipolar Faith, as it's my story, right? But I also am hoping that other people see themselves in the story, in the ways in which poverty and class and war and sharecropping and, the effects of slavery and all types of things, right, contribute to what we would now call mental illness, but nobody is calling mental illness, right, in the life of a sharecropper in the early 20th century. And trying to say, like, this is really complicated, right? That being Black in America is very complicated. And a lot of times people aren't stopping to say, how do you feel? And so a big part of that is really trying to shine a light on them. But how are you doing? How are we feeling? How are we managing these various things that we know that we all manage? And so I would say that's really where I was trying to push through. And I think it became a part of my calling, whether I was not aware of it all at 19. At 19, I'm just like, I think this is what God wants me to do. But to talk about those things we're not talking about, to say, of course you're not okay. How could you be okay, right? Whether that's around issues of sexual violence or domestic violence, in which I've worked, or issues around depression and mental health.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that is a powerful story. And I do believe that we inherit we inherit the the mentalness or the even though, like, for instance, we can be fearful and not have any reason to be fearful in this life. So what I think we do is we inherit from our ancestors, the mental problems or the fear or the things like that. So even though you didn't know the story, I think you inherited some of it. Do you not agree?
Oh, definitely. I mean, at the time, nobody was using words like epigenetics, right? But
right.
Right. Yes. I mean, but spiritual sources have long said, right? Not always in the best language, but you inherit the blessings of your ancestors, you inherit the curses of your ancestors.
Curses, right.
I don't know. We want to use
their mental framework.
Right. I don't want to quite use that language of blessings and curses, but yes, we inherit what our ancestors have, right? We get the bad stuff and the good stuff, right? We get the things we would rather live without, and we get a lot of their survival techniques and their joy and their faith as well. And when I think and the fact that we get it genetically, right, is newer knowledge, but the fact that it's kind of part of who we are and it shapes us and it's part of our experiences and part of our family stories that we've known for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. That is very true. So I think what I'm understanding is that your grandmother told you that your grandfather died because he was sad, and we're saying now that because when I heard the story, I'm thinking that he committed suicide because of the horrible conditions that our ancestors had to live in, slavery and those things, and racism and all those things. But I think what you're saying is he died because he committed suicide because maybe he was depressed. Is that where we're going with that?
Well, I'm saying yes, and yes, right? I mean, I think, to say, oh, there's no one giving a clinical diagnosis of depression, right? To people in that time period of this kind of this status of life. So what I want to say is like, well, it's not about having like some clinician look at the check boxes and say, oh, this is what you have, but realizing all of that is a lot for a person to bear. It's a lot for people to bear, right? Right? Because maybe it was just the grief of losing his wife and being like, oh my gosh, I've taken care of these 8, 9 kids, right? That's overwhelmed for anybody, and sharecropping and racism, right? And, all of the things, right? I'm saying, I think it's all of those things. I don't think you can say, oh, let's take one out, and isolate them. Because
Yeah,
that's
all of
for
those
our
things.
lives now. It's like, it's
Right.
all the things.
Yeah. And nobody expected us to be sad about our situation. You know what I mean? They just expected us to bear it, all the horrible things that our ancestors had to go through. They didn't really even expect you to have something like mental illness or depression or something like that. But this segues right into the next question I have here, because you say that we've been overlooked, as Black women in the United States who live with a managed depression. So why do you think in your research that we have been overlooked? You're saying Black women, but I'm assuming, it pertains to men too.
Well, I mean, one thing I can say is that this is somewhere I've seen things change a lot in the last 5 to 10 years, right? This Bipolar Faith came out
5 years, just 5
in the
years?
last 5 to 10 years. Yes. I mean,
Wow.
there's been so much more conversation, I would say.
Wow.
In the last, 5, especially with COVID, where everybody's got some kind of depression,
That's
right? There've been, and everyone's kind of driven online in ways that we hadn't been before. And with the advent of things like blogs, right, where people would say, these are my experiences. So there's much more communication about it, I think, than there had been previously. But I think there is still very much this expectation that Black women are going to save us, right? I mean, we think about how we talk about political movements, right? And the political activism and the voting power of Black women, right? And the sense that we're going to hold it all together. We're going to raise a family, go to work, do the things, da 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 da. And oh, by the way, how are you doing? Right? That there's, I think, still this very much an expectation that if you're able to do the things and handle business and make ends meet, that you're okay, or even better, that you're better than okay, that you're strong, right? Or there's very much a sense that if you are a person of faith, then you should be fine. You should be okay. You shouldn't have challenges and problems. And we have specific expressions that actually imply, right? Imply that. And so I think more and more we're having conversations about, you need to rest, sis. You need to, we all need a little therapy. We all need some help. And I am thrilled to see more of those conversations. But I think there's still very much this sense that you only need mental health assistance if you've broken all the way down, as compared to like, we could all use, it's more access than need, right? It's like I say anybody Black over age 10 could use a little mental health assistance, just because of racism in the world, right? Let alone whatever particular experiences you've had or your family dynamics that you might want to talk to somebody about. And so I think we still aren't quite thinking of mental health as much as we could as preventative, right? Like you go to the doctor once a year to see how you're doing, to get your physical, to get your checkups, you get these tests run. Let's also run by and do a little check-in on our mental well-being, right? There's something else we have to upkeep. You brush your teeth every day, you eat food every day. Like we need to do something for our mental wellness every day.
Well, I got 2 circle backs on that. The first one was the superwoman tendency of Black women. And you're right, it's predominantly in the Black woman, in the Black woman's kind of experience, because they're raising children, and a lot of times there's no man in the home, and they're holding down 2, 3 jobs, and they're and they pride themselves on being superwoman. In fact, my mom was one of them. You know what I mean? She raised 4 children by herself and had 2, 3 jobs. And, I came around and did the same thing, saying, hey, you know what? I can look after my kid. My mom did it, So that's the superwoman tendency but they did it because they're strong. Now, again, when we look over in the experiences of, the white women, they all have husbands, and they stay at home and look after their kids by choice, and this type of thing. So I understand that. But I think the second part of the circle back is that you're saying that creates some kind of mental depression, illness, things, and they should go to a doctor and get that checked up. Where are you leading with that? I mean, what do? They go to the doctor and say, doctor, I'm working too hard, I'm not getting any support, I need some help. Yeah, how do they do that?
Well, yes and yes, right? I mean, my friend and colleague, Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes, has written a wonderful book about this trope of the strong Black woman. Is called Too Heavy a Yoke, which I highly recommend. And, she talked, and I think some of it's not like I'm trying to be the strong Black woman, but like there's stuff that's got to be done, right? And I'm the one who's here to do it. So I don't know if it's always as much a role that people say I'm so strong, but well, there are children, there's jobs that have to, I think it's also, a result of deep love and fierce responsibility as well. And then not having always the space or permission, right, to say, oh, but let me rest. When are you going to rest, right? This is why we have some of the same things we're talking about, right? Whether it legacies of war and poverty, these are also the ways in which Black families look are legacies of slavery, right, in the United States, and the ways even that enslavement has manifested in parts of the African diaspora, where in the ways in terms of how families are structured, and even the policies and practices, right, around what family structures look like and how those are rewarded and punished and those kinds of things. So, I'm always trying to say, like, it's complex, right? It's not like there's one single thing that leads us to where we are. But I think we are in a place where we can say, hey, but even in the midst of all this, let me see how I'm doing. So I think for one, more doctors are asking how people are doing. They're beginning to talk more about stress-related illnesses and stress-related conditions. I think it becomes on ourselves to say, oh, I need to do something about this. If you have the benefit, and unfortunately in this country, a privilege of health insurance, then, you could try to, get some therapy through that. There are so many online sources. People are reading books or groups.
They're offering therapy in insurance now. They never did before. So they are offering it. So they've recognized it, right? Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, the times that I'm talking about, therapy wasn't covered by insurance. Isn't the time that's covered in Bipolar Faith, right? Let alone if you really needed help on something, then let's just raise your rates and make it impossible to get, health insurance. So, I mean, so it's not where it should be at all, but I think it's getting better. And there are more, not enough, of course, but there are more Black therapists, right? And more culturally competent therapists who will understand all that people are bringing in terms of their racialized and gendered experiences as well.
Right, yeah. So what do you suggest? I mean, we're going a little bit off topic here, but what do you suggest? Let's say that, our audience is, African American women, and, they have a heavy load, 4 children, a couple of jobs, and because of that, they have health insurance. So let's say if they go to a therapist, are you talking talk therapy, or how would they actually address this mental issue?
I think we address it in lots of different ways, just like we address our spiritual health in lots of different ways and our physical health in lots of different ways, right? So if you say, for example, to be physically well, you have to move your body somehow, right? Whether it's walking, exercise, being sporty, but you also have to eat. You also have to brush your teeth, right? It's not like it's one thing you do every day. It's a number of things we do to be physically at least functional, right? If not okay, and better than okay. Same thing, right? Spiritually, you may go to a place of worship, but then you maybe should also do some study on your own. And maybe you want to have a prayer life of your own, or meditation life of your own. And maybe you have other people of a shared faith who you talk to about your faith experiences, right? It's not one thing. So I would say the same thing, right, about our mental well-being. Like, if you can get to a therapist and you like this person and trust them and develop a relationship, like, that's great. But even they're gonna, like, you can't call them at 2:00 in the morning. They're not gonna answer, right? So you also have to, cultivate close friendships. And you also have to take time to, like, even if it's like, oh my gosh, the kids have gone to bed, I have 20 minutes for a cup of tea to myself, where no one is asking anything of me every day, right? That counts, right? I mean, so I think it's all the different things you put in place, whether it's, okay, I'm reading some books by people, you know, on the topic of what I'm trying to work on, my self-esteem or my trauma experiences or whatever it might be. So I think it's, you know, we have to put in small things every day or a little bit every week so that it all builds up together to help our mental wellness.
Got it. I'm glad I asked the question then, yeah, because some, you know, so people can wrap their head around that there are solutions. And you're right, it doesn't always mean that, you know, you have to go to a therapist. There are things that you can put in place. And yeah, I forgot you know, we went down the rabbit hole as far as mental health, but I totally forgot that you were a minister and we're talking about faith here
Right.
and spirituality, and going to church actually does relieve that. Yes. So yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Well,
All
it
right.
can relieve it. I mean, depending on what church you're in and what experiences you're having, right? For some people, church can be unhelpful, can be re-traumatizing, right? Depending on what someone's talking about or preaching or doing. But if you found that right faith community that works for you, right, then it really can be quite freeing and liberative.
Yeah. So it's always been very freeing for me. So I couldn't understand you being in a place you're not, that you're not getting some benefits from. All right. So, one of the great things about your book is that you kind of cut yourself open and, talk about some personal issues and personal things, and you're sharing so you can help others. So you shared some very intimate details of your life, such as living with depression yourself, and also being raped by a fellow cemeterian. How did that experience affect your faith? Was there a time where, you're angry with God or any of that stuff?
Yes, all of those things, right? I mean, I think
you like my questions. You always say yes to all of them.
Well, I mean, I think experiences of deep suffering cause all of us to have, at the very least, a hiccup or two in faith, and at the most, a kind of loss of the kind of faith that we have. And you live long enough, you're going to suffer, right? Like, you're going to lose people you love just because we're mortal, right? You're going to have some kind of pain, whether it is the kinds of traumas that I discuss or not, right? There's going to be some level of suffering, and no one likes it. No one's ready for it. It sucks, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like, nobody wants to suffer. It's not a part of the human experience that we're happy about or that we're going to welcome and say, hey, let's have some pain here. Like, no, it's tough. And even if you kind of know it's coming down the pike, whatever it might be, like, hey, you're Black in America, it's gonna be tough, or hey, you're a woman in America, it's gonna be tough. Whatever it is, you're never ready for it, right? Whatever, or if it's that more personal kind of like, oh, I'm mourning the loss of someone I love, right? A grandparent, a parent, a good friend, right? Those levels of grief. It does, that's all part of our life. And because our spirituality and our faith is part of our life, it's part of our faith as well. And for some people, faith is very helpful and instrumental in holding them up, and they find great resonance in faith community and a lot of support there. But at some point, people tend to ask, why? Why this? Why now? Why in this way? Why me? Why someone I know and love? Like, just, I need some answers here, right? I need some whys. And, a lot of times I find, we don't always have the best answers in faith communities for that why, or sometimes we don't even let people ask why. We act like asking why is a problem, like it's a crisis of faith, and like you're not supposed to do it. When most of our main biblical characters are like, yeah, why God, right? I mean, almost everybody asks God why, and they've gone down in spiritual history, right? They're like, why me? Why do I have to do this? Why is this happening? Why is it happening to my people? Like, it's a very natural part of the spiritual life to ask why. I think what doesn't happen very often is people don't always say, you're going to lose the faith, and that's okay, right? I think a lot of times there's a sense that losing your faith is the end of the world, and it is like heresy or some terrible thing, as compared to like, oh, we've all lost faith at least once, maybe 2, 3, 4 times. And it is our responsibility, I would say, as a faith community, to stay with you while you find it again. right? To hold the space for you, to walk with you, to hold you, to bring you food until you and God find your way back to each other or something like that. Because of course, we don't have the same faith we had as 5-year-olds. We don't have the same faith we had as 15-year-olds because we've seen more, we've grown more, we've evolved and had different kinds of experiences. Like, oh, wow, maybe it's more like this, right? A lot of us drew, I know when I was little, I drew God like a little sun in the corner, right? In the corner of the picture, yellow shining down, like that's the sun, that's God.
With some clouds, right?
Right. Some bubble clouds and a couple trees. And this is our God sunny day, happy picture, right? Well, that's not my faith anymore. And that's okay because I'm not 5 anymore, right? It doesn't mean I don't have a relationship with God or I don't have a faith community, but that's not what it looks like anymore. And so, yes, it definitely caused me to have some questions and to be angry and to say, hey, this is what I've been taught is not matching up with what I'm experiencing, and I'm trying to figure this out. And I kept changing faith communities until I found one that was able to hold that kind of space while I had those questions and while
that's why you talked about maybe sometimes you go to church and it's not doing it for you.
Right.
So my circle back to that is when did you become depressed, and how did the rape affect you?
You know, I really can't quite pinpoint like when did I become depressed, right? I could say, oh, well, I had this very deep grief when my grandmother died and I was 13 years old. Did I name it as depression? No. Did my family name it as depression? No. Was it depression? Maybe, or maybe it was grief, right? So I didn't come up in a context where people were like, let's label this and let's see what you have and, let's get you some therapy. Like that was not how my parents were when I was growing up, right? They came to that place, but much, much later, right? But that's not how many Black families were in the 70s and 80s. Like, let's go get you a therapy. Like, what? That's what white people do, right? Like, we don't do that. Right? Yes, exactly. So that wasn't kind of an option to say, oh, yes, I can look back and say this was depression. I saw that there were definitely some challenges and hard places in life that made me sad. But to me, I was like, well, sadness is the appropriate response to some of these things. And I would later have clinicians say, well, most people feel sad in this way, and you seem to be sadder in a deeper way. And I'm like, oh, because I don't know most people, right? I only know me from the inside. So I think it's hard to say, okay, this is what, the first depression, this is the second one. But I did have a sense that that sadness was part of who I was. And I had this sense at not a very old age, at a fairly young age, right? I felt like, oh, I'm sad, and I don't want people to know that I'm sad. People wouldn't like sad me, right? This is not part of.
Were you bipolar? Did you have sad and high notes, or you were just
not in the sense of the way most people think of bipolar, right? In terms of high manias, right? And then these very low depressions. So that's never been my experience. And so I would not have named it that way. No one would have named it in those ways at that time. When I talk about the experience of being a survivor of sexual violence, I talk about it in terms of, it was a sense of, that was for me probably the first time I felt like the bottom fell out, right? The bottom fell out in terms of my ability to function the way I normally had, and in terms of my faith. And it actually became, in some sense, my own rubric for how to rebuild my life and how to rebuild my faith, even though I didn't know that's what was happening at the time, right? Because I was able to,
you can't tell. You have to look back.
Right. And I was able to get some help for that, right? I was able to kind of, get those free therapy sessions. And I was able to kind of keep, move until I found a church, until I found arts, until I found a culture, until I found a way of believing that, brought me in some ways to a new way of believing, a new way of understanding myself, a new way of understanding the world. And I think it was because of that I was like, okay, when I hit the next depression, it was still very difficult and devastating, but I felt like I have some tools here. Like I kind of have some tools in my little toolkit here to help me, right? Not all the ones I needed, but at least I felt like I had community and support, and that this wasn't going to take me out.
So you're thinking, so the therapy help you get those tools in the toolbox?
Yes and no. I think it was maybe I would say therapy is one of the tools in that sense, right? Group therapy was really helpful as a survivor of sexual violence because you have this feeling that you're by yourself and no one knows how you feel. And then you're like, oh, wait, here go 5 or 6 or 7 other people who do know how I feel and who've had similar experiences. So I think sometimes, group therapy is what's needed and what's helpful. Other times it's that individual therapy where you're talking to someone about your particular stories and your experiences. I think a good therapist is always going to ask you, so what tools you got? What are you working on? How's your friendship network? How's your such and such? What are you doing for this, right? They're going to help you develop what those tools might look like, right, for you. Because they're like, no, unless you're suicidal, I'm not answering the phone at 2 a.m, right? Like, because you're upset. Like, that's what you have friends for. This is what you have your faith for, right? You should have someone you can call at 2 a.m, but it probably isn't the therapist. And so, I think that for me, I kind of got them all types of ways, and therapy was helpful for that. But I think now I would say therapy is one of the tools in the
tools, right, in the toolbox. So that's amazing. Well, it's it's always difficult to have the bottom fall out, whether in any kind of grief or violence or one of the traumas, the big T traumas that we're experiencing in life. And then we have to go through that to get to the next level, Yeah, I mean, I can say this again, it's a lot of things that, one of the things that we say in the Black community, God always gives you a test so you can have a testimony. But I know that nobody wants to have to go through those things in order to have the testimony. And I like what you say. We never want to suffer. We never, we know that things are going to happen, but when it happens to us, we never want to suffer.
And I don't, right. And I mean, I'm not one who believes like, okay, God's giving you the test, you can have a testimony. I'm like, no, this sucks. This is terrible. And I'm not saying God did this. I think some people made some really crap decisions and did some of this, right? And it's that combination of my past and my ancestors and what I have to work with and society and individual decisions that other people make. And all of that wrapped up in some big messy ball, right? That sometimes gets us to where we are. And I think that, being able to have a testimony on the other side is less a factor of one's faith and more a factor of access to these kind of resources, access to therapy, access to friends, access to, the kinds of things that are going to help one to heal, because plenty of people don't, right? I mean, I think we have to remember that, like, many people don't heal. Some people don't come out stronger. Some people, many people come out weaker and broken and don't survive various things, right? And that doesn't make them any less faithful or beloved by God, I think.
Yeah, I was looking at the glass half full, but you're right. It could be, there's a lot of people that take these things, you're right. I mean, and I'm in the space to know this, that a lot of people never recover from trauma. All right, so but let's talk about your books now. One of your books is Making a Way Out of No Way. I mean, we're supposed to be talking about bipolar faith, but I had to get that one in because, again, it's one of the things we say all the time in the Black community. So how did you put that in the book, and what was the theme and purpose of it?
I mean, in many ways, I would say Making a Way Out of No Way is the theory behind, right? Bipolar faith behind it's a kind of the theoretical underpinning that you see the narrative form of in bipolar faith, right? So bipolar faith is my story, right? And it's the story of my family. And I like to think that there's some threads that feel like an African American story. It threads like an American story, right? So it doesn't read as just Monica's own story, but it's my story, right? And I think of Making a Way Out of No Way as this is the belief system that's behind it, right? This is what I believe about God, what I believe about community, what I believe about salvation, and not salvation in the what gets us to heaven sense, but salvation in the root word salve, right? To heal, to be a balm, and to make us well, like what I believe about what helps us to be whole and helps us to be well. And that it is making a way out of no way, right? And it's really not no way, it's just a way we can't see. Right. So it's not actually, the expression is making a way out of no way, but I think technically it's not that there is no way, it's a way I can't see, a way I don't know about, a way that is not obvious to me. And that's where the God part comes in, right? That it's, God and hopefully us as, as the created peoples, right? Humanity and the rest of creation, working together to, in the best of worlds, make the world a better place. Right.
Okay.
To transform in creative ways.
So that's great. So yeah, when we say that word or that phrase is, it's blind faith almost, knowing that regardless of how bleak it looks right now, that God is going to make a way out of no way. Tomorrow you're going to get up and, another one, weeping endures for the night, joy comes in the morning kind of faith kind of thing. So I like that. So do you feel that your story in Bipolar Faith, you said that was the foundational principle. Do you feel that that is how your life progressed? That you had the spiritual power that that propelled you along, and God always made a way for you to prosper?
Not quite. I don't know that I use that language. I'm not even sure if I'm prospering. I think I'm doing all right. But I would say, what I talk about in the book is that it is meaningful, and I would even say needful, to be parts of communities, right, that are trying to creatively transform what we got, whatever we've inherited, right? Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's kind of like, oh, this is what we got to work with, to transform what we have into creative ways, to make the world a better place, to kind of use common parlance, and that we often do that through teaching and healing. And I would say that I have had the joy of being in, sometimes helping to form, sometimes helping to lead, other times just being in these kinds of communities, right? Communities that care about healing, communities that care about teaching, communities that care about each other and the wider world, right? And that this is done in and through and with the power of God.
Perfect. Got that. All right. So, so how can people pick up a copy of Bipolar Faith and connect with you? Yeah, so talk about your ministry.
Well, you can always go to bipolarfaith.com. And if you go there, you'll probably find more than you ever wanted to know about the book. You can find links to buy it. You can also always call your local bookseller and ask them to order it for you. You can use larger online booksellers if you prefer. If you go to bipolarfaith.com, I do a lot of music in the book. So you'll see some playlists there. You'll see a couple videos there. You can grab a little bundle I call Behind Bipolar Faith, where there's a workbook available. If you want to do this like in a reading group, for example. And you can also hear a couple interviews from like a psychiatrist and other faith leaders with me about bipolar faith. So you can find a bunch about bipolar faith there. You can also go to monicaacoleman.com and find more information about me there. And there's a contact button. And you can also grab a free devotional. So if you go to the homepage, you'll see a free 5-day devotional there. And that's just my gift to others about, a little devotional that I use for the spirituality I really have, not the super holy one people think I have.
Okay, that is awesome. Love it. So you do music as well, huh? All right.
Well, I don't play the music. I just, it's kind of like a little soundtrack in the back of the book. So if it were a movie, there'd be music in the background, right? So I do, it's more like that.
That's awesome. And what's your social media handles?
Oh, Rev Dr. Monica. So you can find me at REVDR Monica on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Reverend Dr. Monica. Love it. All right. Well, Dr. Monica, it has been a pleasure talking to you. It's been a pleasure, coming through our ancestral journey. I'm glad that you were able to connect yours and understand your history and understand how it's affecting you now, and the fact that you wrote a book that, kind of helps us to understand bipolar faith. Now, I got the impression that when first of all, when I heard the title, I thought it was talking about the bipolar depression. But I think what you just explained a minute ago is the bipolar faith is falling out of, being angry and falling out of maybe love of God and then meeting him back. Is that it?
Both. Right. Again, my yes and yes answer. Right. So yes, it is.
Right? You
right.
mean both things.
It is about bipolar, right? The diagnosis bipolar and living with a bipolar 2 type of diagnosis. And I talk about diagnosis in the book and where I find it helpful and where I find it limiting as well. And kind of what it is to kind of, bipolar 2, particularly at the time that I was diagnosed, was not often diagnosed. It was a much more uncommon diagnosis. It's becoming a bit more common. Even some of my psychiatrists didn't even always know about it. And I'm like, that's not helpful. But, so it was a less common diagnosis. And some have argued that it's probably the more common form of bipolar. And that bipolar 1 that we hear more about, right, is a less common version, but more extreme, you might say. I mean, it's clearly more interesting if you're making a movie, right? to have people, right? It's got much more activity going on than, ones where it's like, I'm just productive as compared to I have, more pronounced mood swings, right? No, I just kind of don't sleep enough and get a lot of work done. Like, that's not something you want to watch a movie about. So of course you don't hear about this one quite as much. And so I do talk a bit about the actual bipolar condition and what it means to kind of, try to live with balance and try to live in the middle, right? Amidst extremes. And yes, it is also, as you're talking about, which is a topic that's very close to my heart, right? Losing faith and finding it again, right? That's part of the spiritual journey.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right. So like you cover both things in that one little word. I love it. Bipolar faith. Okay. All right. Well, listen, thank you, Dr. Monica. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Like I said, I wanted to reach out to you and wanted to have this conversation because yes, I wasn't sure how we're combining the two, but yes, bipolar faith. Excellent, excellent title. I love it. And yeah, someone that's reading it can understand about, being bipolar, having bipolar faith, and also understanding how they can get healed with community and God and faith and the whole thing. So it's a beautiful book.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. All right, guys, as we wrap up, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and rate and review us on iTunes. And thank you, Dr. Monica, again for this brilliant conversation. And until next time, blessings.
Thank you.
Welcome.